Nirgatena munir murdna Samiksha prabhavastraya Tapyamanam tribhuvanam Pranayamai dasagnina Nirgatena munir murdna Samikshya prabhavastraya. Someone, anyone? Tapyamanam. While practicing austerities. Tribhuvanam. The three worlds. Pranayama. Practice by breathing exercise. Etasa. Fuel. Agnina. By the fire. Nirgatena. Issuing out. Mune. Of the great sage. Murdna. The top of the head. Samikshya. Looking over. Prabhavatraya. The three great gods. Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshvara. Translation. While Atri Muni was engaged in these severe austerities, a blazing fire came out of his head by virtue of his breathing exercise. And that fire was seen by the three principal deities of the three worlds. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, the fire of pranayama is mental satisfaction. That fire was perceived by the Supersoul Vishnu, and thereby Lord Brahma and Shiva also perceived it. Atri Muni, by his breathing exercise, concentrated on the Supersoul, or the Lord of the universe. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord of the universe is Vasudev, Vasudeva Sarvamiti, Bhagavad Gita chapter 7 verse 19. And by the direction of Vasudev, Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva work. Therefore, on the direction of Vasudev, both Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva perceived the severe penance adopted by Atri Muni, and thus they were pleased to come down, as stated in the next verse. Tapyamanam tribhuvanam pranayamai dasagnina nirgatena munir murdna samikshya prabhavastraya. While Atri Muni was engaged in these severe austerities, a blazing fire came out of his head by virtue of his breathing exercise. And that fire was seen by the three principal deities of the three worlds. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachadeshtarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya evacha. Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So this chapter is titled Genealogical Table of the Daughters of Manu. And it's describing, first of all was described Dakshina, she's a daughter of Manu, and how she was married to Ruchi, great sage, and then they gave birth to, anyway, they gave birth. Then there's a description of, well, this is Atri Muni, of course, but different. Yes. So Kasyapa, Kasyapa's a son of Swambhuva Manu. Purnima is another son, and they married different daughters of Manu, or it's quite something actually. So Prasuti was handed over to the son of Brahma named Daksha, and then Kasyapa, who's a son of Brahma, and Purnima, who's also a son of Brahma, they gave birth to different children, Viraja, Vishvaga, Deva, Kulya, who are interesting persons. Of these three, Deva Kulya was the water which washed the lotus feet of the Lord and later became the Ganges. It's all amazing. So then Anasuya became the wife of Atri Muni, and we're reading about them now. And so Anasuya gave birth to Somadatta Trandavasa. Her partial incarnations or representations of Prabhupada, the verse calls them Sambhavan, which Prabhupada translates as incarnations of, but then they're referred to as partial representations. But there's a connection like that, and it's all going back to Swambhuva Manu and his daughters. I forget actually, quite frankly, how many daughters he had. Anyone remember? Anyone remember? 3. Only 3. Okay. Okay, I thought it was more, but anyway, okay. Well, Devahuti is a daughter also, right? Oh, okay. All right. Yes, and they gave birth to all these extraordinary entities, as we just read a moment ago, Deva Kulya became transformed. Well, Deva Kulya became transformed into water. Hare Krishna. But things like this go on. It's really quite extraordinary. Different, in the process of creation, different personalities giving birth to different species. Someone is giving birth to birds. Someone else is giving birth to snakes. Hare Krishna. It's all really quite fantastic. Here in this verse, Anasuya's husband is Atri. He's one of the great sages. And his particular specialty, you could say, was pranayam. That was mentioned a couple of verses ago in verse 19. And it's mentioned again here that Atri Muni, he was engaged in severe austerities. If the noise is, a nuisance, just close the door. We can turn on the air conditioning. Yeah, it's not the best, is it? So there's a little movement of air, hopefully. Is it? Yes. So his specialty was pranayam. And through a yogic practice, but centered around pranayam, he became so powerful that a blazing fire came out of his head. Yes, and lit things up quite dramatically. So, a sort of related situation was there we read about a few months ago when I was here last, with Kardama Muni. He was engaged in, I forget exactly what, but it wasn't entirely just absolutely only pure devotional service. There was some yogic factors involved in his practice, although he became pure, like a pure devotee, but his practice, there was a mixture. So this is the case here. Atri Muni is one of the great sages of the universe. And as such, you cannot say that he's not a devotee, but looking at his program of activity, it becomes apparent that there is, one could say, a mixture there with some pranayam particularly. And through that practice, he became particularly powerful, and fire came out of his head, my gosh. I remember reading a few years ago that if one's going to do hatha yoga, and particularly if one's going to do pranayam, the breathing exercises, then one has to do it under qualified supervision. You don't just, do a few exercises, that sort of thing. Because if Pranayam is prana. You're dealing with the prana, the life is. And if you're not careful, the life is may become imbalanced. And if the life is become imbalanced, the classic example of that, result of that, imbalance of the prana, of the life is, the classic result is insanity. And according to Vedic traditions, if someone shows some symptoms of mental disease, some sort of psychosis or all these types of mental conditions, then the normal cure is specific breathing exercises. That's the normal cure. So when Lord Chaitanya, as a young man still at home in Navadvip, Lord Chaitanya, after he had been to Gaya for the last rites of his father Jagannath Mishra, and of course he had been initiated there also by Ishvara Puri, initiated specifically into the chanting of the holy names. So Lord Chaitanya came back, as one could say, as is said sometimes, a God-intoxicated person. Everything was just Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. Yes. So in that condition, he was teaching Sanskrit, but, which is very demanding intellectual activity. But sometimes Lord Chaitanya at home into states or a state which looks like insanity. He would at home, he would just literally go berserk and start screaming and smash things. I was reading, probably in Chaitanya Bhagavatam a few weeks ago, how Lord Chaitanya did like that, and smashed the pots, smashed doors, threw out all the rice and other grains, just sort of threw it all out, and just, so everything was contaminated and just had to be thrown away. And Mother Sachi, she tried to pacify him, but she couldn't at all. And so she called for the doctor. And the doctor came, and a few others came with the doctor, and they saw this condition, extreme condition of Lord Chaitanya. And immediately the diagnosis was imbalance of life is he needs some exercises or some sort of program to balance his life is. I'm just mentioning that because it's really part of the Vedic tradition. Even though we, as Westerners, we might well think, if someone's a schizophrenic or has some sort of real psychotic condition, that balance the life is, the normal the normal system these days. I mean, it's one thing if someone's just got some anxiety and maybe depression, something like that, then a psychologist is engaged. But if someone seems to really be psychotic, just in a really terrible psychological condition, then they get psychiatrists and give them drugs. And Srila Prabhupada said, I read many years ago, but I just checked up on it a few weeks ago. Prabhupada says, psychiatrists are humbug. All humbug. That's what Prabhupada says. Not psychologists, or maybe he includes psychologists, I don't know, but he says psychiatrists are humbug. And I remember, you know, Ishvarapuri, Giriraj Maharaj's disciple, the doctor, when he was studying, he, just at the end of his studies to become a doctor, he had to go out to different hospitals, and he had to go to one mental hospital somewhere around Durban, I guess. And he had to interview some of these psychotic cases, people who are really, just really in another world and not a good world. And so he was interviewing one of them, who was obviously a deeply troubled person. And as they're in a sort of semi-public area, and one other of the psychotics walked by, and the one that Ishvarapuri Prabhu was interviewing sort of noticed him, turned and looked at him, and then with a bit of a smirk on his face, like it's a bit of a joke, he said to Ishvarapuri, he said, "You see him? He's crazy." I mean, it's sad, actually. I mean, I know it's sort of amusing. I remember we were in 1976 in England. There was a huge drought for months in the middle of summer. It was really hot, like 30 degrees practically every day for weeks, and water supply was rationed and all that. And not far from Bhaktivedanta Manor is a mental hospital. And some of the patients, a group of maybe 10, they somehow ended up walking through the grounds of Bhaktivedanta Manor as we were having lunch outside. We would have lunch outside. So there we are, we're outside having lunch, about 100 devotees or more. And these people came by. And, they're obviously sort of, kind of in altered states of consciousness. But they saw us sitting there having lunch, all the devotees. And they just looked at us. And then they started laughing. But, not just laughing, but, sort of funny laughing, strange laughing. So this is the thing. I mean, this is an interesting point, at least, that it's not just a matter of someone is depressed, or if someone is in whatever, some type of psychological condition, just give them some drugs, or particularly materially, just give them a pep talk or something like that. it's a deep science. The psychological science is very deep. And the normal treatment, according to like classic Ayurveda, for psychological conditions is balance the life airs, which can be done if a person knows how to do it. So, but we see nowadays people do yogic exercises. Yoga has been quite popular, maybe on and off, but since, the 60s, I remember, yoga meditation became popular, and it's popular now also. But it's not just a matter of doing some exercises. Particularly, it's not just a matter of doing some exercises for the sake of your physical health. But it's like a preliminary hatha yoga, which includes pranayam, and ashtanga yoga, which is sort of kind of the same difference, so to speak. These are preliminary parts of the whole process of yoga. And if those practices, even just those simple practices of sitting in certain ways and, the yoga standing on your head maybe, these types of things, they have to be done, or they should be done under careful supervision. Otherwise, it can have detrimental effects. And it's not just, good for the health, which more than anything seems to be the attitude nowadays. I remember reading, in fact, we read, I think, in Prabhupada Lilamrita not long ago, well, a couple of months ago perhaps, how Prabhupada initially, he was looking for suitable categories of people to preach to, particular groupings, not just different individuals, but one of the groupings that he wanted, he felt could be receptive were those who are practicing yoga and attending yoga schools. So Prabhupada went a few times to some yoga schools. And he had some different experiences. Yoga schools, meditation, often it's mixed in together. At Dr. Mishra's country ashram, you may remember, I'm sure you've heard it being read in our classes, that Prabhupada, that at Dr. Mishra's yoga ashram, there was a meditation room, and some of the students would go in regularly and sit, cross-legged, the sort of the pose like that, and then meditate on something. And Prabhupada noticed that some of them would doze off. I was, actually it was in 1976, I went to India for the first time, and me and another devotee, we're part of the British Yatra, we had to stay back at the end of the festival into April to pick up paraphernalia for Radha Gokulananda and Radha Landan Ishwara. So we had to stay an extra couple of weeks. And one day we went to Radha Kund and we stayed overnight at the Radha Raman temple just by Radha Kund. And in the evening, they had a class on Chaitanya Charitamrita in Bengali. To this day, I can't. Actually, when I was last in Mayapur, I sat in a Bengali class to see if I could understand, but I couldn't follow it. So there we are. And in the class, there's maybe 20 of these Babajis, and we noticed a few of them were dozing off. And the devotee who was with me, this one devotee, Irish, he said to me, he pointed out, see these people? And he said, they must be real devotees because they fall asleep in class. Anyway, that's by the way. So, but there at Dr. Mishra's ashram, Prabhupada went into the meditation room and he was quietly chanting and watching these however many, several meditators, and he noticed one or two of them didn't, not just the classic ISKCON, you know what it's like, not like that, but right out. They just fell asleep for some minutes. And then Prabhupada talks about how one of them, he's out for a few minutes, but then he wakes up. And he told his friend, this is a very nice meditation. And Prabhupada comments that, yes, this is a very nice meditation. I feel very peaceful. And Prabhupada commented that, yes, if you have a little nap, you'll feel refreshed, of course. That was about the meditation, Prabhupada's comment about the meditation schools and the yoga studios. Prabhupada commented that mainly, or possibly exclusively, but definitely mainly, the main attendees were overweight ladies, middle age, getting on to some degree, who wanted to lose weight. And that's about as far from real yoga or meditation as you can get. But actually these processes are very powerful. And like we mentioned, one has to even be careful if one's going to try and do it seriously, because you could end up like Atri Muni, just from pranayam, you could end up with fire coming out of your head or something. It could cause some real disturbance in the physical system. In the physical system, that's there, but also in the psychological system. Here, Atri Muni is described as being engaged in severe austerities, doing pranayam. Facilitating his pranayam, he was engaged in severe austerities. But austerity hardens the heart. Gradually one becomes more and more insensitive to others and to implications of different activities and things like that, the needs of others, and one becomes hard-hearted. And there's an interesting description in Chaitanya Bhagavatam in the course of Lord Chaitanya performing the Mahaprakash Leela. Lord Chaitanya tells the story of Krishna of Lord Krishna, Balaram, and the cowherd boys entering Mathura and meeting, first they meet the washerman. Anyway, they meet the washerman at some point. And Krishna asks the washerman, the washerman is Kamsa's personal washerman, and he's got some of Kamsa's personal clothes, which he's just washed and got all prepared nicely, and he's taking them back to Kamsa, to the palace. And Lord Krishna just walks up to him in a sort of, real boyish way. Hey! Boys will be boys. And Krishna was one of the boys. Hey, you got nice clothes there. Wouldn't you like to give some to us cowherd boys? Yes? And the washerman took great offense and spoke insultingly to Lord Krishna. And Lord Krishna gave him, as we say sometimes in Chatsworth, a what happened. This is the home of the what happened. A slap, a backhanded slap. Whack. And the washerman's head fell off. And that was the end of the washerman. And then they took the clothes. Krishna and the cowherd boys and Lord Balaram took the clothes. And Lord Chaitanya explains there, it's really amazing actually. He explains that washerman had performed severe austerities for many lifetimes. If I remember correctly, hundreds of lifetimes, but many lifetimes, so he could see God. And now he got to see God. But because his heart was hard through severe austerity, when he saw God, he was too insensitive and just too hard-hearted. So he offended Krishna. And what happened to him? Well, we don't know actually what happened after that. But it was his relationship with Lord Krishna got off to a pretty bad start. Maybe because he met Krishna, he saw Krishna, he got the touch of Krishna's lotus hand, at least the back of it. And so, it can't be all bad, but still, it's not very good. So, if one performs austerities and yogic things, then some power will come. Srila Prabhupada said about Bhavananda, or he told Bhavananda Prabhu many years ago. Bhavananda Prabhu observed Chatumasya very strictly, extremely strictly. And then some demons attacked the Mayapur, our Mayapur project, and India being India, some of our devotees got arrested, although it was some of the local crazies who attacked the temple, but some of our devotees got arrested, and one of them was Bhavananda. And so he was taken to the jail in Navadvip town, and then somehow or other, the whole case got into all the newspapers in India, and it became a massive scandal how these foreign devotees were being treated like this when actually they had been attacked. And particularly it focused on Bhavananda, who at the time was a sannyasi. And Bhavananda became famous throughout India. And Prabhupada told him afterwards that it was because you performed Chaturmasya so seriously. Yeah. It was some sort of, because Chaturmasya is kind of material, or mixed at least, put it that way. Depends how you dovetail it. But in and of itself, just sleeping on the actual earth and not cutting your fingernails and not shaving if you're a male and all that. It's kind of material. So Prabhupada said like that he became famous because of his austerities. So just imagine, devotees, how powerful you become if you become a pure bhakti yogi. How powerful in transcendental Krishna conscious ways. It's a fact. It's a fact. If you all carry on practicing, even though, it's possible to say, well, you're ladies and, ladies are meant generally to be more gentle and whatever. But if you carry on practicing very sincerely devotional service, you'll become powerful in transcendental ways. Like when people speak, when you speak, people will take note. That's a power. That's a power that comes through devotional service. Yes. So there you go, devotees. We'll carry on tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Any comment or question? Yes. Oh, yes, we got to use the mic. Sorry. Yes, please.
Maharaj, how do we determine which austerities are favorable for our devotional service?
Okay. Well, how do you determine which austerities are favorable? You can always ask your spiritual master, but you may not even need to do that. If you just ask a senior devotee, generally senior devotees will be able to answer that quite easily. But Prabhupada did make the point that for us, our main austerities are chanting 16 rounds a day, particularly or as much as possible without offenses, and following the regulative principles. Yeah. And engaging in service, of course, but those are kind of like foundational austerities. Yeah. And Srila Prabhupada didn't appreciate when devotees took up, other even Vedic austerities. Yeah, he didn't really appreciate. One boy in Mayapur, for austerity, he started during the Mayapur festival or around that time, he started living in a tree, literally in a tree, and chanting like 64 rounds or something. That's all he would do. He'd sit in the tree and chant. And Prabhupada commented that he would become a monkey. Prabhupada didn't comment that, he's chanting so much. But in regard to the sitting in the tree, that part of it, that he might become a monkey. Yeah. So yes, as Prabhupada said once, if you're not, say, knowledgeable, actually Prabhupada said if you're not intelligent enough to understand something, ask someone who is. Yeah. So you can always ask the spiritual master, but there's probably quite a few other devotees who can say. But I tell you what, this austerity of chanting 16 rounds minimum without offenses, once you've got that together, then you can think of some other austerity. All right. It may take a while to get that one together. That's the most important austerity. Okay.
If it's okay. I was wondering about, I was hearing how the Lord's paraphernalia, or the paraphernalia and clothes of a transcendental personality are non-different from them. But I'm trying to understand if that would mean, like for Srimati Radharani's clothes and jewelry, are they expansions of her, or are they individual jivas who are on the topmost level of Krishna Prema? And then I was also wondering, for our spiritual masters, how can we understand this statement?
Yeah, well, in the spiritual world, everything's alive. Yeah, everything's alive. So whether they're, in the case of Radharani, expansions of her or whatever, in that sense, they're definitely alive and they're definitely devotees. Yeah. Like you see on the cover, at least it used to be, maybe it still is, of the 11th canto, second part, where Krishna's about to leave this world. The hunter, whatever his name was, anyway, the hunter, who fired the arrow at or in the direction of Krishna's foot. Krishna was behind a tree from where he was standing. Then the hunter came around and saw it's Krishna. And he offered obeisances, and the picture's there. He's offering obeisances, as I recall. And standing or sitting around or crouching, whatever, around Krishna are certain personalities. And they are the conch, chakra, club, and lotus flower, the classic paraphernalia of the Lord, in their personified forms. Yeah. Yeah. And Sudarshan, particularly the chakra, he's quite a famous person. He speaks, and in different shastras there, Sudarshan gives instructions, but he's the chakra. But he's a person, and he's a devotee. Okay. And, the spiritual masters, or, say the spiritual masters paraphernalia, or any Krishna conscious paraphernalia, should be treated as tadiya, as the paraphernalia of the Lord, and should not be, abused in any way. Prabhupada would not throw away envelopes. He would write notes on them. And they're just envelopes. That's also partly not wanting to waste, but it's the paraphernalia. A letter came from a devotee in an envelope. So, we should never waste, casually throw away things, particularly prasadam. Oh my gosh. I was watching the other day, one devotee, I will not mention the name, came walking down here in between these two buildings with a plate of prasadam. And I thought, You're not going to, are you? I thought the devotee might be looking for a quiet place to deposit some prasadam. But it's not nice, because it's really important paraphernalia of the Lord, or even a form of the Lord. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay, that's it, devotees.